So how I coped with some of the abuses I received from my family, the domestic violence and the abuses from the gangs and the kids at school. I lived near a block of flats. I used to go to the top floor in this block of flats. I used to just look out the window and watch the world going round. And that became a place where I reflected. I was very depressed. Sometimes I cried there because I was so hurt. And it was also a safe place because the gangs didn't know where I was hiding. And I could sometimes see them running around the streets or even looking for me. And it was a great place of escape. And it wasn't too far from where I lived. So there were different routes to get back home. I started, people laughed when I shared it because I started singing songs about my experiences, and they were all negative songs like It's All Gone. I sang a song about my life and it's all gone, where I'd lost everything. And I had moments of like that in this block of flats, but it was my place of safety. No one knew I was there and I could watch the world go round. And I used to stay there for hours. But it was very hard. I didn't have the only other person, even though I had like Mummy G, the family that adopted me, took me in and made me a part of their family, which is what some families do today, but is needed with a lot of other young people. They need other mums and dads who do know how to bring their kids up properly, who do know how to give love, to take in some of these other children who are not receiving that at home. So even though I had that influence there, my abuser, which was really weird, he used to have conversations with me that was kind of, in a weird sort of way, normal. Nobody asked me at home, how was your day? What did you do at school? I could have some of these conversations with my abuser, and it got to a point where I said to him, why can't you love me just as a father? He said, I do love you as a father, but I also love you another way. And it was very hard to be involved in that situation. My mum used to send me to his house every Saturday to take bread and cakes that she had baked for him and his family. And he abused me in a kind of covert way in front of his family, with the stairs, with sitting next to me, and just when I would move along the sofa, he would move along the sofa to get near me, and when they weren't looking, he would try to touch me in certain places, and it was very hard, and I just needed him to give me that father's love, and the only place I could really get that was with the family that took me in. There was no expectation to be anything other than myself, and they treated me like one of their own. But it was very hard to cope with all the emotional baggage. It developed a rage in me that helped me when attacked by gangs and other students. It gave me some strength, which later on developed into extreme violence with guns and knives. And I'm seeing, when you've been abused, when you've gone through domestic violence and sexual abuse and things like that, you, as a child, you have a coping mechanism, but as you get older, you have to find different ways to cope. And I'm seeing children today who have that type of rage because of what they're going through. It's almost like PTSD. I can hear their cry. I can hear the cry of these kids, and it's a silent cry, but you can see from lived experience, and you can empathize with those emotions that they're feeling. And now I can show them solutions. Helping these children is like me going back to that little boy that I was, and kind of like putting a hand on their shoulder and showing them, okay, this has happened, this is what you need to do, this is how you need to try and deal with it, this is how you need to see it, and it gives me that opportunity. And not everyone can hear this cry. Sometimes you have to have been through some of that stuff to be able to recognize it yourself. And I find that in the work of Refocus that it helps me in helping these young children, boys and girls, having lived that experience myself. So looking back over my childhood, going through all these different experiences of abuse and racism, I can see that there are times when it would have been useful and helpful to have people who could intervene, who understood. And I had neighbours who have helped me not grow up with a chip on my shoulder, but the input they gave wasn't enough, and I had the family that took me in, and that was a help because I stayed with them a lot more than I stayed with my own family. But there were times when I needed teachers who understood, and there was one teacher who passed, she's passed now, Mrs. Cordenley, but she was completely different, and I was sent to her so much during the times of racism, and she just had a completely different view, and she spoke to me differently and nicely, and her hands were tied in what she could do, but she was a help, and she took me under her wing a little bit, but she was limited in how she could protect me from some of the abuses I received. And also I found that, looking back, certainly today, looking at some of the young people today, they find it very difficult to talk about sexual abuse. And I remember quite a few times, one in particular, I've had to help a 9-10-year-old boy who had been taking drugs, slept with a baseball bat under his bed, and there was another service who was trying to teach him about the consequences and things, but he wouldn't talk to them, he wouldn't talk to his parents, and he got on really good with his grandfather, and he just wouldn't talk about what he'd gone through. And because I was part of this service, they called me, and I spoke to this young lad, and I shared my experiences of abuse and rape, and it struck a chord with him, and he then began to tell me how he was sexually abused, and he found it so helpful, as I would have done had I had that type of help, or someone who'd been through racism. I needed people with lived experience to give me that support, kind of like what you would get today if you had youth workers, because they have been so key in helping the young people before they closed a lot of the youth services, because it gave the young people an outlet. That there were people who were allowed to self-disclose about their self, and in doing so they were a great help and support to the children. It's a shame that a lot of that's been lost, but this young lad opened up, and with his permission to share with the other service what had happened, he was able to share to them himself, and they were able to provide the right help for him. And I think that I needed some diverse people. I needed people from different cultural backgrounds, different, different ethnicities, kind of like how Refocus, we try to recruit people from diverse backgrounds to help other young people today who are going through different struggles, and people with those backgrounds and lived experiences. And I think that's what I needed when I was going through it. Someone who knew what it was like to go through racism. I think with the family that I was part of, that had taken me in, it was a black husband and a white mother, and they had experienced it. They never shared some of what they went through with me. They did try to give me solutions. They were there at the school gates when gangs were waiting for me. They chased them away, but it would have been great to have more of that, and teachers who were watching the fights from the windows, if they could have just come into that situation and intervened, because it was an attack on all sides and there's just no way of defending yourself. You're getting kicked and punched every day, 5 days a week, and you sometimes were scared to go into the playground when it was playtime because you knew what was going to happen. And it was really such a traumatic time, and because it seemed like it was condoned, it just made you feel more angry, more enraged, and it fueled something inside me that just wanted to react in a violent way. And until the time came where I decided no one is going to harm me again. And when I made that decision, as a hurt person, I began to hurt people. I hurt them so bad. When things went from fistfights to hearing, like some of the children today, they believe that everybody's carrying a knife, and it's not true. The same lie was told me years ago, and I carried a knife. And when you have this kind of injustice done to you, put a knife in the person of a young guy, it's just too dangerous, it's lethal, because you've got this knife, and if someone says something wrong to you, you just want to stab them, and the punishment doesn't fit the crime. You dish out excessive force. I was making sure that everyone who called me names, who did something that I didn't like or treated me a certain way, I saw them as those racists or my abuser, and I was going to hurt them, and I did, really bad. And as a consequence, I got into lots of trouble, ended up in and out of prison. My behaviour was so bad when I was really young that by the time I was 11, I'd gone to court 5 times. They'd put me with social services. I was taken from my family and put into children's homes with other naughty kids. And I had to survive again. I had to learn to survive, and I fought, and I got into so much trouble. They moved me from place to place. They even tried to get me to try and get along with my family. But my family, we didn't have a relationship. That relationship was lost in my early years. And then I had sibling rivalry in that my sisters tried to destroy my relationship with my father because I was someone they really wanted. One Christmas time, that relationship got broken, where I struggled to return that love to my father, and for some reason the whole setup of my sisters trying to destroy my relationship with my mum and dad because they wanted to be the ones that they were proud of. They managed to kind of disrupt that in some way, and my father and I, and my mother and I, we just never was the same again. And then all my sisters, they started to get that love that I was getting, and my mum started to say things like, You know, why can't you be like your sisters? They don't get into any trouble. And I was always called a liar and a thief, and her favourite saying was, "He was a naughty boy." You know, she used to say that in the Caribbean patois, that I'm a naughty boy, and that's all I used to get. And even many years later, when my mum developed dementia, she remembered, "You was a naughty boy." That's what she remembered. And you know, it was so hard, but I swore no one would hurt me again. And I could just see the little boy inside, you know, crying. Just really needed someone like these youth workers, like someone with lived experiences, to sit me down and share with me how they got through things, tell me that it's going to be okay. And I think looking at some of the children today, that's what they need, and that's what we give them. We also try to love out loud, so that, because they need that love, and it breaks down their barriers. Looking back over the years, the early years, what I had from my mother and father, I received love. And my dad, he took me out, he did things with me. You know, I had the nurturing of both parents, and it was beautiful. When I lost that, even though I had a father, it was like I didn't have a father. I had to manage on my own, and I had some nurturing from the family that took me in, but you know, they wanted to adopt me full time, and because they lived too near my family, they were unable to. They thought it would cause me more conflict and hurt. But what I see today is kids who have fathers, but they're absent fathers, and what they need is someone to be there for them, someone to do things with, someone to encourage and help them, and not always be telling them off or smacking them. My family became very strict, and we just needed someone to explain to us. I identify with some of the kids today that I work with not having that, and so when you don't have it, you kind of grow up wild, feral, and you start to try and teach yourself how to be, and because you don't know the right way, it comes out wrong, and your hurts come out wrong. And if there's no one there, you need a father to sit you down and talk to you and do things with. You know, some of the single mums, that they struggle to be both mum and dad to their children, and it's really difficult. And I'm seeing that gangs today are trying to give the kids a negative side of that, and they're responding to it, and it's just having that kind of effect.